Hey everyone, in this video I'm painting up a Blood Raven with the aim of paying homage to the Dawn of War video game franchise. Blood Ravens are one of my top Space Marine chapters, if not my #1 favourite, and this is all down to the Dawn of War games. I never played the tabletop game that much growing up, but what I did play were these games. 12-year-old me was obsessed with Blood Ravens, and this intro cinematic to the game has stuck with me ever since, and it always gives me a hit of nostalgia, and in my opinion is one of the best intros to any Warhammer game. The Blood Ravens will fight against all odds, delivering victory no matter what, but yes, they might steal a few things along the way apparently. So with all this in mind, what am I aiming for with this recipe? The key points I need to pull this off is a very warm palette overall for starters. The red needs to be rich with a dark mid-tone. The highlight should be desaturated, working in grey for chipping to bring gritty realism. The metals must start bright, and I'll shade down with washes to save more time and get a more grimy finish to these metals. The beige armour and tabard needs to start bright and stay bright so I can go to town with weathering and grime to knock it all back. The leather needs to stay desaturated, keeping the focus on the red armour panels. And the eye lenses can be super strong and vivid green as we've been so desaturated with the rest of the palette. But above all, I want to do a more authentic or mature rendition of Blood Ravens compared to this one I did many years ago. For this one I went for a much more heavy metal style obviously, but it just doesn't fit the kind of themes that I associate with Blood Ravens and Dawn of War. So for the full recipe I'll have every single paint I've used in the description below, but to start out this red armour I'm going to be using Khorne Red, which is a really nice dark rich red tone. There's a tricky balance to get this Blood Raven's red just right. I don't want it to be too dark and have it look like a flesh tear, and I don't want it to be too bright like a Blood Angel. It's important at this base coat stage to keep the brush moving quick and don't overwork the paint. Once it's down, just apply a second coat after it's all dried to make sure you get the smooth finish. I'll be doing exactly the same with the Carrick Stone. With these brighter paints you run more of a risk of creating texture, so it's extra important that you only work with the wet edge of the paint when you're laying down the base coats. If I've missed an area, I'm not going to overwork the paint just so I can cover the whole surface area in one go. I'm going to be patient and apply 2 to 3 thin coats to get nice opacity, as you can see here. Now for the parchment, in order to get some differentiation from the materials, I'm using Steel Legion Drab for the purity seal on the leg and the chest. And again, for the same reasons, I was using a different colour for the parchment. I'll be using chocolate from AK for all the rest of the leather. That includes the ammo or grenade pouches around his waist and any other belts. I could have used Rhinox hide, but I wanted to go for a quite dry feeling, really old leather. Compared to Rhinox hide, which is a much richer tone, I feel like that gives a more brand new look to leather. I want this to be very worn and very battered. And once all those elements are in place, I'm just going to carefully start to block in the black trim and other black elements. So the trim of the pauldrons, the undersuit, the aquila on the chest. I'm not painting this all black because I'm thinking of this guy as a kind of a veteran, so I want to keep the skull gold, but that means I also wanted to denote his rank with the helmet. I'm not sure what colour I needed to do, what is correct, so I just went for rule of cool and painted his helmet black. In retrospect, I think it would have been cool to have his helmet as a cream beige tone, like the Carrick Stone, but in my mind that denotes a captain more so than a veteran. With all that down, it's time to start base coating the metallics. As I said previously, I want to start very bright, so I'm using a mix of Vallejo metal colour burnt iron and Vallejo air colour aluminium. With this I get a nice shiny bright base coat, which saves me a lot of time because I personally really don't like working with true metallic metals. I feel like it just gums up my brushes and it gets everywhere. No matter how hard I try, I always end up finding like the odd spot of metallic pigment where it shouldn't have been. I don't know how it gets there, but it just always tends to happen. So if I can minimize the amount of true metallic paint I need to use, it'll most likely be better for me. With that, I'm base coating the gold as well. The same as the silver, I'm starting bright, and for this I'm using Monument Hobbies Bright Gold. Now that I've got that all base coated down, it's time to start shading. This is the most important part of the red armor. It's equally as important as the highlights because we want to keep this strong, vivid red tone. And in order to keep it reading as red and not pink, we need to shade it down. So I'm creating a mix of Khorne Red and Caliban Green. These two colours being opposite on the colour wheel will react quite nicely, creating a more natural shadow tone. And I'm not the best at glazing, so I've mixed in a few drops of glaze medium just to help me along the process. And I'm doing about 2 to 3 layers, building it up slowly because I want a nice gradual transition. If you want to go for a more tabletop approach, you can thicken up the paint a bit and do it in around 2 layers. I'm making sure to put this glaze down in the lower half of the armor panels everywhere that should be in shadow to create some sense of volume information. And with that in place, it's time to start our highlights. We're not going to be doing too many highlights in the generic sense. With this, I'm just trying to richen up the red colour. So the first pass is going to be an equal mix of Khorne Red and Mephiston Red. And I'll be showing this on the shin pad. I'm just trying to create a nice strong cylindrical volume, a line of light that goes down the centre of this shin and the top of the foot. I'm applying the paint with a very thin brush. I'm doing thin lines that go across the surface. I'm applying these marks horizontally, not vertically. I feel like that gives the most aesthetically pleasing kind of brush stroke. We could obviously do this with an airbrush, but I want to show how we can do this with a brush only and still get a nice result. It does just take a lot longer, but it's still perfectly achievable. I'm focusing on large areas of light. I'm not going for a super shiny finish to this armor, as that's not in keeping with the Dawn of War kind of aesthetic. It needs to be nice, broad areas of light that we can then apply weathering on top of that. So you can see here on the chest and the top of that neck guard, I'm laying down large areas of this red highlight tone. And for areas like the gun arm, where it's facing up, I'm not going to get a lot of sunlight onto those surfaces, so I'm just paying attention to the edges, and that will help bring some light direction into this piece. Now I'm starting to move up into pure Mephiston Red. And you can see my brush marks are starting to change now. I want to bring some subtle weathering or texture to this ceramite. So I'm applying more scratchy marks or stipples in areas. Now this paint isn't a massive jump in brightness or value, so those marks aren't going to be necessarily very visible, but they're still going to make a difference. Now what I'm starting to do is add some reddish grey. So using this reddish grey, it's still going to give us a pink tone, but using grey is going to allow us to keep more of that original colour. Using white, I find, kills colour a lot quicker than grey. It's a lot more forgiving and it gives us a much more pleasing result. There's a reason why so much grey is added to paints to affect its coverage, as really it has a mild effect on the colour. At this point I'm still considering these marks as a natural highlight of the red rather than weathering, and once I have these marks down I can easily blend it back in because we're not making a huge value jump. I can just glaze back down with that Mephiston Red, which you can see me doing here on this ankle plate. And with those rough scratchy marks in place for the red, it's time to start highlighting up the Carrack stone, or the beige parts. This is all going to be done with the same highlights for the cloak, the knee pad and the shoulder pads. So I'm just taking Carrack stone and mixing in a touch of deck tan from AK. Now for the tabard, I'm just applying some very lazy, nice and quick stippling, just to give it some material feel to it, to differentiate it from the ceramite armor panels. And I'm not going to be applying many highlights, so I'm just going to do a nice thin layer consistency for this Carrack stone and deck tan first highlight. So I'll need about 2 coats to get a nice opaque finish, and I'll be stippling all the way down, focusing on the raised areas and the recessed areas, as that's how cloth would naturally collect light. Once the main areas of light are in place, I'm going to bleed the edges together just to create a rough blend. And once I have that first pass down, I'm going to, instead of stipple, I'm just going to glaze over the areas that are going to receive the most amount of light. And I'm just going to be mixing in a bit of AK grey brown to start off some weathering or like mud collecting on the bottom of this tabard. I'm thinning this down to a very thin layer consistency, and I'm just applying scratchy marks and the occasional stipple, and I'm allowing it to pull, dry a little bit, and then wipe it away with my thumb to create some intentional staining. And for the knee pad, it's a sphere, so I'm just going to lay down a very simple shapes first. We've got that sphere where the light would catch, and then I'm applying a bounce light to the outer perimeter of this kneecap, and that is the area that is our light volumes, and all we need to do from that point is just do a load of scratchy marks, dots and dashes to blend these two shapes together. And I'm not worrying about making this absolutely perfect, because it really doesn't need to be. To get the most bang for our buck, I'm just gonna make it nice and rough, and the next highlight stage will fix anything in terms of blending. The main thing we wanted to do here is establish our light volumes and break the shapes down to fake a blend. And I'm just going to do the exact same process for the shoulder pads. The shoulder pads are basically a sphere that has had its lower edge extruded down to form a kind of cylinder. And as we're not going for a super shiny finish, I'm being very broad with my areas of light. And here I'm just continuing that weathering on the bottom edge of the tabard. I'm using pure grey brown here, nice watered down, creating some heavier deposits of mud. And now I'm applying the top highlights for these beige areas, just adding in simply a bit more deck tan. And now to highlight up the parchment. The work has been done in order to differentiate the material with the base coat, so I'm just going to be applying exactly the same tones as the beige areas. So I'll be adding in a little bit of Carrack stone and a little bit of deck tan to the Steel Legion drab. For the parchment, I'm applying horizontal lines just to really emphasize the kind of wrinkled, creased nature of paper. And now to work up the black armor panels, I don't want to overdo this. The only area that I'm going to boost the brightness is going to be on the head. So I'm keeping my value range, my light and dark, for the black areas relatively narrow. And to work this up, I'm going to be using black, any black, with French Mirage Blue, creating a 50-50 mix to start off, and then working with pure French Mirage Blue, adding in some deck tan for the top end highlights. As we've already established our areas of light with the beige, I'm just following those volumes. The only area that you need to be super careful with is the shoulder trim, as usual with Space Marines. Now for the rest of the leather elements, the chocolate brown elements, I'm starting off the work with a dilute black wash, focusing on the recesses, on the recess detail. When working with this type of, it's kind of heavy metal inspired, half the work is really done with the shading and half the work's done with the highlights. A shade is equally as important as a highlight. Now I'm going to be washing all of the metallics. Starting with the silver, I'm going to be using a mixture of Basilicanum Grey and Rattling Grime that I'll just alternate on my brush as I go, and instead of thinning just with water, I'm going to be thinning with the new formulation of Nuln Oil. It's very thin, doesn't have much of an effect, and by using this I'm keeping the properties of the contrast paint that I really want, which is pulling away from those edges and targeting the recesses above everything else. And to wash the gold, I'm going to be using Fire Slayer Flesh, doing exactly the same as the silver, making sure that I don't have pooling, excess pooling on flat surfaces. I really just want to target those recesses and make the edges pop more. In certain areas I'll be doing 2 coats just to make sure I get enough contrast, and you can see this detail, this laurel on the shin. I'm applying the wash with a very slow continuous brushstroke. I'm not stopping and starting. I want the pigment to collect evenly across the sculpted detail, so I'm applying one long brushstroke. Once that's done, the general wash is done. An optional step which I like to do to maximize contrast and make the edges pop more without having to highlight them all is just doing a targeted wash with a mixture of Rhinox hide and black. To make this have the nicest surface finish, I like using a black ink from Liquitex. For the purity seal, the wax of the purity seal, I could have chosen many different colours for this, but I went for red because I don't want it to stand out. I just want it to fit into the overall scheme. So I'm using pure Mephiston Red and just adding in various amounts of deck tan to highlight it up. Once that's all done, I should have done this before highlighting, but I did a subtle wash of Baraknar Burgundy. Now for the leather, I'm going to be showing off the strap for the bolt gun. I'm starting highlighting with Steel Legion Drab. I'm going at the edges first, and then I'm breaking up those edges with a load of scratches and dings and tears, because I want this to appear very old, weathered and cracked. So the flat, I'm applying loads of thin lines, and this interior face, I'm doing a lot of vertical lines and stippling to kind of give it a more of a cross section of how leather would look normally. And then to highlight this, I'm just using some Karak stone. I'm kind of making large blobs on the edges that will carry over onto each of the faces to give it a bit more of a rounded appearance to these edges. And with that, the leather's done. Now, moving our attention to the head, I'm base coating the eye lenses with AK Dark Green. And then to save time, I'm doing a central highlight in each of the eye lenses with deck tan, and I'm creating a fairly thick wash of Escorpina green from Vallejo, flooding the whole surface, making sure it doesn't spill out too far. Once that's in, I'm going to re-establish the deck tan, and then I'm going to do a few thin glazes of livery green. You can use any contrast paint, maybe Striking Scorpion, or if you can get your hands on it, what would be really good is Tesseract Glow or Hexray Flame. And to highlight up the helmet, I'm approaching this helmet as a sphere. So I'm going to have, just like the knee pads, I'm going to have a very clear orb of light on top of the forehead. And as I work down to the face guard, I'm going to be focusing my brightness onto the edge detail and giving an overall mid-tone value to the rest of the jaw just to make it pop. This main orb of light on the forehead is what is going to catch your attention and draw you in. Make sure that the helmet remains a focal point. In comparison to the rest of the black on the model, I'm going to give this a few extra stages of highlight, because as I was painting it, I was noticing it got lost very quickly compared to everything else. So it might look a bit grey in the end, but it's necessary to make the features of this helmet really pop. In retrospect, if I wanted to have this helmet pop even more, I could have added some chipping with metallics. I was going to do this on the actual red armour itself, but once I had the grey highlights in place with some Rhinox hide chipping, I thought that was enough. And I thought the excess metallic inside of those dark brown would draw too much attention. But I think I could have made an exception on the black helmet on its own. I'm noticing that my red isn't quite bright enough, so I'm coming back in with Mephiston Red with a bit of reddish grey and cork from AK. And I'm really pushing up those high end highlights. And I'm only focusing this on the main areas of light, so the shin, the top of the belt, the top of the chest and the neck guard. Now with all of that highlight in place for the main red panels, it's time for what I think is the crux of this whole recipe, which is the weathering and the chipping. What I'm doing to get this tone is I'm taking the Mephiston Red and I'm just adding equal parts reddish grey. Now what happens when I add this reddish grey is it gives the illusion of creating a cooler temperature, contrasting against the very warm red tones for the general red panel. And with this contrast of value and temperature, the chipping is going to stand out way more and give this armour tons of character. Compared to if we were doing a traditional highlight pattern where we would continue the red into the oranges. This chipping is going to stand out a lot more and it's going to look more gritty and realistic. Continuing with the weathering, I'm now going to start adding in some grime to the beige shoulder pads. To do this, I'm mixing together. I'm using that mix that I used for the metallic shading, which is black and Rhinox hide. Another big thing that is going to help the red armor is black lining. I should have done it a bit sooner, but you can do it whenever you want really. So to do this, I'm just taking black with Khorne Red, 2 parts black to 1 part Khorne Red, thinning it down nicely so I get good flow off the brush and I can really accurately target those recesses. Now for the transfers, if you can find nice quality transfers for Blood Ravens, by all means let me know in the comments, but the ones I found I just got off eBay, and the only issue I found with these is the small ones were slightly too small and the big ones were just a bit too big, and on top of that the transfers are all part of one sheet. They're not pre-cut out like the GW transfers, so that means I have to cut as close as I physically can to the transfer so I don't get any flaps of material going over the edges of the pauldrons. but they apply just like any other transfer. Make sure you gloss before, lay it down, and then put a layer of matte varnish on top. You can do this with the brush. This is what I did. I just laid down some GW Ard coat and put the transfer on. And then I'm just chipping it in to make it look hand painted, and that is going to finish this Blood Raven. Well, I hope you really enjoyed this video and found it helpful if you're looking to make some Blood Ravens of your own, and even bring back some nice nostalgic memories of the original Dawn of War games like it has for me. But other than that, if you want to see more educational videos like this, more in-depth videos, they are available on the Phoenix Miniature Art Patreon. Please consider checking it out. We offer tuition as well if you are interested. But apart from that, thank you so much for watching, and I'll see you in the next one. Bye.